From Scholar to Stripper in Less Than 10 Minutes by Callisto IV. This is a fun one that's still high my game several sessions later. I'm not sure what they were trying to say there. I'm taking my players through a modified version of LMOP, no spoilers, and decide that they get a letter from Gundren Rockseeker as the plot hook. I love making handouts and grab some parchment and a pen. I use erasable pens that are heat activated, but didn't think it would be a problem. Then I decided a wax seal was an awesome idea. 2 days later, and I finally get to give the letter to my players, excited to see their reactions. They start giggling as the letter gets passed around. Turns out the wax seal was warm enough to erase some of the ink, removing the top left part of the R in Rockseeker, turning him into Cockseeker. I have never been so mortified while laughing my entire life. Well, I mean, not gonna lie, probably not the worst way to go out, but at the same time, definitely the sexiest way to go out, am I right, y'all? Why, greetings, my travelers and seekers of tales of amusement and entertainment. It is I, the Lunar Skald, here to regale you with fanciful stories that will meet all of your curiosities. In today's episode, we have a couple of rather interesting stories that I hope you'll get some kick out of it. And without further ado, let's go ahead and see what we have for today. Player makes his PC's backstory overly dramatic and expects a free magic item from it. Posted by user Voltem0. This happened in a D&D 5e game I hosted a few years ago. I once had a player make a Hexblade Warlock that was a Knight of an Order so secret, nobody knew they existed, yet so cool that all people that saw him would be willing to offer him free housing because he's just so cool. This order of knights was named the Seven Deadly Sins. Oh, I already see where this is going. And his character was the Sin of Wrath. This was, I think, a ripoff of the anime Seven Deadly Sins, while him being so cool and getting free lodging was seemingly because he was jealous of others that had taken the entertainer background. Before joining that super secret order, he was but a humble farmer from a village that then got wiped out in an interplanar war that had been going on for more than 2 years, which had apparently been wiping out villages left and right randomly. Mind I, the DM, wasn't asked about this. He just claimed this and expected me to make it canon. His village being wiped out left him with some magic MacGuffin magic item, but that magic weapon was infused with pure evil, and whispered to all those near him, and would tempt them to evil. He stole that one from one of the Grey Knights from Warhammer 40k. Oh, what heresy! He expected this part of his backstory to be reason enough for me to give him a magic weapon, when I already told him in advance I wouldn't do that, and didn't allow any such thing for any of the other players. Also, in that village, he left his poor innocent daughter behind, and it was so sad and oh so tragic that his character could never get near her again due to his tragic fate. Insert sad violin here. Finally, despite being such an apparent badass, he was a level 1 adventurer, so he said his blade was broken or something and claimed that was reason enough for him to be level 1. We talked about it. He didn't get to play in that campaign. You always gotta love those kinds of people. They over-dramatize their level 1 character, who ends up being so boss and badass in their backstory. And then they just end up as level 1 somehow, and you kind of have to wonder exactly where that badassery was supposed to even come from in the first place. Definitely a key thing to note when creating your character is that you have to make sure that they fit into the level 1 area. You can't make them a badass and then suddenly they're just a pitiful level 1 who is probably going to immediately die in the next battle. Also, the fact that this person was expecting the DM to just immediately make all of the things canon, despite how insane all of the stuff that was going on was in there, and even expect a magic item. granted a cursed item, but a magic item? Don't you think that's a little bit early for something like that? Like, just to immediately have something like that? I mean, again, communicate with their DM and make sure that they're okay with it. You can't just expect them to give you things for your backstory willy-nilly without even communicating what it is that you plan on doing. That's just not how you're going to make a good DM, or, well, a good character, or a good, you're just kind of going to mess things up with the lack of communication is what I'm trying to say, so don't do this. Posted by user Easy Recognition 2798. The Cleric who refuses to heal even himself. Extra long. Throwaway account. Compared to other stories, this is probs not much of a horror story, and I'm more just on the need to write and post this to vent, especially since it's still fresh. So sorry if I'm rambling on all over the place. We have Cleric who has been playing really well and balances our support and healer and can pack a punch too when needed for offense. Apparently he got into an online argument about the Cleric class on FB. I don't know where he went for the argument, but he was ranting about it to us on our Discord channel. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to go full on into this voice. It's just the props part just got me so into the mood. It was just like, okay, we're doing this voice for a bit. Okay, anyway, moving on. To sum it up, apparently he was pissed that some people were arguing about a post on clerics being more than just healers. We chatted about it and basically agreed with Cleric that he really can do pretty nifty damage and even did an OTK on a horde of zombies with his Destroy Undead. We told him to ignore those people. He's an awesome Cleric and just continue doing him. That is most likely what triggered as to why he started playing more offensively and casted buff spells less frequently. And I get it. I also played Cleric before, and they can deal major damage when they decide to be on the offense. Thing is, the Cleric class, at least with how our Cleric plays in combat, isn't built to focus on dealing as much damage as possible, but to be a balance between support, healing, and damage. The few combats on the first session we had after he vented at Discord, although our group's combat dynamics became kinda off. We weren't really bothered by it and kinda just rolled with it. Roleplay-wise, Wizard just lightly pointed it out by commenting along the lines of, "Feeling a bit on the violent side today, eh?" When Cleric cheered hard every time he managed to kill any enemies, our initial nonchalance might be because the enemies we faced were not high threat levels, as that session was more focused on investigation and rallying allies. His behavior, however, also started becoming unpleasant at times. He developed a sort of one-sided rivalry with our fighter. FYI, I also play a fighter, different subclass though, who was our main melee damage dealer, and the wizard whose attack spells focus on AoEs when in combat. He was noticeably projecting the people who argued with him online onto us, especially with comments like, "Yeah, now you need the Cleric to solve your problems," or "Damn, good luck guys, I hope you don't die when the Cleric's not with you to keep you alive," when our party's separated. Like, bro, none of us ever invalidated your Cleric, like, ever. What point are you trying to prove to us? Me personally, I got pretty pissed when he once flaunted how much more damage he did than my fighter, and my response was like, yeah, duh, because unlike our other fighter, I built mine to be a tank and combat support. So he could be the shield and divert attacks away from you guys, which he just brushed off. The DM has already berated him on it by pointing out that we're not the people that argued or invalidated his Cleric class on Facebook. He doesn't need to prove a point to us because we acknowledge his essential role as a Cleric and to stop taking out his frustration on us and our characters. We echoed our DM's sentiments and he stopped his comments, thankfully. But then shit started to go downhill super fast when we faced off one of the villains and her servants. Strategy-wise, villain focused more on giving us curses, debuffs, while her minions dealt the damages, and prevented us from getting to her. Some of us were poisoned, blinded for several turns, frightened to name some. It was a frustrating fight, but it was even more frustrating that Cleric refused to cast spells that could resolve our conditions or heal anyone, even himself. every time it's his turn, he would only cast offensive cleric spells like Guiding Bolt, even using up his higher level spell slots to cast them. Sure, he did damage when his spells hit, but he repeatedly fell unconscious, especially when he thought it wouldn't be a wonderful idea to run headlong into the middle of the enemy crowd and be surrounded by them, just so he could cast his spiritual guardians. We collectively groaned when he said, "I'm a cleric. I keep the party alive, and the best way to keep the party alive is by killing those that are trying to kill us first." When in combat, Bard, who was usually our strategist and the one making it easier for us all to hit and kill things, ended up having to be the main healer, with her healing words and healing potions, especially every time Cleric falls unconscious. The situation turned really dire when it's just the Bard still standing, cursed with 1d8 damage every turn and outnumbered 3-1. One of the minions hasn't even been damaged yet. Cleric's player went off on her, telling her to heal him back awake. Desperate and thinking that he would cast Mass Healing Word to get us all back on our feet, she did so. And you know what Cleric decided to do? He used his main action for an offensive cantrip. I forgot the name, but basically those within his melee range gets attacked. Then his bonus action to cast Spiritual Weapon at higher level. Both spells missed. What's even better? Villain uses her turn to attack him with just the Bard's 5 HP of healing he got. He was obviously taken out. Again. We were close to a TPK, and even the DM sounded visibly distressed at how the battle was turning out. The Bard managed to survive another enemy round. She was close to being taken out as well, but somehow managed to survive the minion's turn and the villain's turn and succeeded her save to end her curse. When it was her turn again, Cleric's player had the audacity to demand her to heal him back awake again. She ignored him and woke me instead with her last potion because I was exactly next on the turn order, and also had a potion to help another player. Cleric groaned and demeaned her for it. She replied with, "Since she's a character with a strong strategic mind, given what just went down, it was what she would have done. Which has got to be one of the most satisfying. It's what my character would do I've ever heard." I then managed to get the fighter, who I might add was on his last death save, the only potion I had, used Action Surge to finish off a minion with disadvantage because I was still fucking poisoned, and Commander Strike the fighter into attacking the villain who was next to him, and landed a whopping huge nat 20 damage on her. Still not dead though. Wizard's death save came up, and by some digital dice miracle, he also rolled a nat 20 and was revived by 1 HP. Now this is where we all got a bit sidetracked, because this is the first time anyone rolled a nat 20 on a death save. We weren't sure if Wizard is allowed to do anything on the turn he was revived by a nat 20 death save, but regardless, the DM decided to allow one action, and will apply it for any future nat 20 death saves in his games. Anyway, Wizard used the Scorcher spell, forgot the full name, but basically fire damage in a straight line, at a higher level and killed the villain. We ended the session by dragging the last living minion back to our base. We stuck around longer after that in the voice channel to discuss the session and did a bit of analysis on the combat with some metagaming knowledge. Cleric's player was pissed and complained that he could have finished that fight and got us all out of that situation faster if Bard healed him. DM challenged him on that and asked him what he would have done if Bard chose to heal him awake again. And he said he would do the exact same thing that he did with the missed spells. As how I've laid out how the battle went down about even if he managed to land both spells and took out the villain, they'd still end up getting wiped out by any 2 remaining enemies with what's left on their HPs. That was one thing. But then Bard brought up an interesting point. Wait, how many spell slots do you even have left? I stalled a little in answering by saying he'll check his character sheet and stumbled in his words. Guess what? He only had his cantrips left and several low-level spell slots. His spiritual weapon would have been casted at its lowest level if he pulled through on his plans, which means that even if he landed both spells and both at full damage, he and Bard would have also been wiped out by the enemy's turn. The revelation made things awkward in the chat for a moment, so DM directed the conversation to the Fighter and Wizard's Nat 20 miracles that happened at the last moment. Fighter also added that even he wasn't sure that we could have won despite his Nat 20, and even revealed that during the combat, he PM'd the DM for some way to let him sacrifice his character so that the others can survive and escape. I give a bit of an input question on the encounter's difficulty level, and Cleric chimed in that the encounter was too rough. The DM told us that although the encounter was made to be difficult, befitting of one of the main villains, it was the most difficult encounter we have faced compared to some other high-threat encounters we had. He pointed out that we fought harder enemies before with even worse rolls. For some reason, we had several Snake Eyes rolls on one of the encounters, lol. Plus, we were even at the lower level back then, and still managed to beat them. At some point of our discussion, Wizard went frontal with Cleric, asking why he wouldn't heal anyone, even himself, that it wasn't cool to make Bard deplete a lot of her spell slots for healing words, while he kept on abandoning us like that when we were dying. Cleric got defensive and argued back that everyone else had a form of healing spell healing to take care of themselves except for Wizard, but even then he also had a potion, which is why Cleric assumes that everyone will be fine. He got rebuted on that when we pointed out that everyone, including himself, was knocked out except for Bard and Fighter, was so close to making a new character with his failed 2 death saves. I don't remember what else we argued about, but I think it struck a chord in Cleric, who got pretty quiet when Wizard more or less said something like, if you have now stopped caring about our characters, at the very least, you could still try to care about your own character, instead of caring more about proving a point to a bunch of internet strangers. You argue with like 3 weeks ago. They're not even here to watch our sessions and see you prove them wrong. Hell, even if they were watching our sessions, you're not exactly proving yourself right either. We echoed Wizard's feelings, and then he just abruptly left the voice channel. Not sure what's gonna happen next session, but the DM says he'll discuss things with Cleric after giving him time to cool off, and that's where we are now. I don't know how to end this post. I feel better after regurgitating this out in writing, though. Have a good week, I guess. Whew, boy, okay, so this story is really something here. So it does kind of cover up a couple of problems at once. So the first problem, obviously, is just not to be the kind of person to dictate other people's actions just because of their class or their role. That thing is not necessarily how you try to make better characters. If anything, it's definitely a hindrance to how somebody could properly play their character the way that they would like to. The problem, however, that arises is that the person takes the advice so critically that it ends up actually making them go in the opposite direction of how to properly play their own character. I'm not trying to dictate, obviously. But, considering the fact that the Cleric is clearly meant to be built as a balance between damage and support, the Cleric definitely did not work with that build, obviously, and that ended up costing his team quite brutally, and especially in that battle, because the Bard was basically left to do all of the support because the Cleric refused to do any of it just to make a point to people that he has never met, people that do not have anything to be able to gain by continuously harming his own team by not doing the support that he clearly built for, and he ended up harming everything about the relations with the party because he refused to do what he built his character to be. I'm not saying you should be forced into a role of support, but when you do build for support, your team is kind of going to be relying on you to at least do something to help them out when they're in as dire a situation as this. Again, play your character how you want, but don't play your character at the expense of the party, or because this ends up being an issue. There are quite a few lessons to take away from this story as long as it is, but it covers a lot of ground that is very important. 1, make sure that your character is in fact somebody that can work with the party. It's not going to end well if you end up working against the party, whether you intended to or not. 2, don't have people dictate what your character can and can't do. There are ways that you can be given advice on how your character should play, but ultimately the way you play your own character is up to you, and you shouldn't let other people influence or tell you how your character should or shouldn't be played. Advice is fine, but trying to dictate another person's character is a completely different story that shouldn't be done. And this ends up being one of the consequences to trying to do that. And finally, do not let other people try to fill in the role that others have desperately hoped that you would do. Or, well, all in all, just don't follow the examples of what happened here. I mean, don't be the people that criticize what being a certain class is supposed to be like, but do not end up falling into the pit that the Cleric did, because that ended up costing his party and it nearly got them all killed. And it just led him to a lot of, it just led to a lot of issues with how he saw his character, because before, he was completely fine. He played his character the way that benefited him and the party. He did damage, and he healed. But then he just went full-on complete damage, even though it wasn't what he was built for. So do keep that in mind, everybody, and just play how you're built, and make sure that you always look out for your party in the best ways that you can, because this is a team-playing game. Play your individual role well, but do so for the benefit of the party. It's a very big balance that you have to work at. But with that, we're gonna end the video here, so I hope you all enjoyed these stories, and until next time, may the lunar embrace you on this fine moonlit evening.